Hey there all, Aman here from Transition Partners, here for another episode of Leadership Lessons in Cyber. Here we go. Hey Christina, how are you doing?
I'm great, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for coming on and I suppose agreeing to be part of this this journey that we're going on over the next sort of month or so. I think with Ada Lovelace Day, which we're going to be talking a lot about today, and then Cyber Awareness Month next month, I think it's quite good for us to connect and sort of understand your journey. But I suppose for me to stop doing all the talking, tell us a bit about yourself, what you're doing, and your journey, please.
Sure, absolutely. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. Let's see. I had a bit of an eclectic journey to where I am today. I went to school for philosophy and medieval history, which has nothing to do with cyber, right? So, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, and I ended up falling into just technology in general by way of being a point of contact for the technology department in an administrative job that I had, and just kind of fell in love with it. You know, I may have hacked a little bit into the system that I was helping out with, and discovered some bugs and things like that, and sent it back to IT, and just really fell in love with it, as I said. So worked my way up through application development, which is also an oddity. A lot of times in the CISO roles and upper SLT roles for cyber, but I think it adds some flavor to my perspective coming up through a different path. So I came up through app dev into project management, overall IT management. I've managed most of the different groups across technology, with the exception of infrastructure and help desk, which is the traditional path for most people. So just giving me a slightly different perspective, both from my career path and as a woman. And so, just had some great opportunities. And one of the things that I've tried to make sure in my career that got me to where I am is to take risks, right? So doing things I had never done before, but just, saying, hey, why not, right? And taking over things and just making a run with them. So that's what happened with security. I was in a new role, and the CIO looked at me and he said, hey, you know what a security department looks like. We don't have one. I need you to go build one. Because I had worked at, some major institutions, so I knew what a good one looked like. And I was like, okay. So I called a friend of mine and I was like, hey, can I buy you lunch? He was a CISO. And so we met for lunch, and I kind of picked his brain on where to start. And then I just went from there and built that security program over about 5 years, and then transitioned into banking, being a divisional CISO over there. And then finally in GRC. It's just kind of a passion for me. I'm not really the hoodie hacker. I'm more the, governance process kind of thing, which fits my background. So, and I think that's a pretty core strength for cyber leadership to have. So I stood up the GRC function for Truist Financial, and now I've come over to Collins Aerospace as deputy CISO, and also GRC too. So a little bit of a eclectic path to where I am today, but it's all about doing new stuff and not being afraid to do that.
I think, you've mentioned a lot of the stereotypical route where people, I think same with my field, you don't grow up wanting to be in security or recruitment, right, whatever it is. Tell me, you've obviously stepped from the IT world to then security. Was that for you intentional for career growth, or was that just sort of just progression wise just happened?
Yeah, it just happened. So the gentleman who was CIO at the freight company that I worked at, he just brought me in because he had to build the organization. We were about 90 people in IT, but it was a core foundation of how operations worked for trucking. So he had to really build it up, and we built it to about 350 people. but he tasked me. I always joked with him because he called me Director of Technology Services. And I looked at him, I was like, hey, Chris, I'm like, you did that because you just wanted to throw whatever into it. It was like the bucket of stuff. And he just kind of smiled. I was like, okay, got on to you. So he would just throw stuff in, and security was one of them. So we had to become PCI compliant because we had reached a certain threshold and stuff. So we had to go in and ensure that we could self-attest. And that was a 3-year project to segregate the network and all of those types of things. So it was a pretty big undertaking, but it was a matter of happenstance, you know, that they needed to build a security group, didn't have one. And he was like, hey, you're better, you know, you at least know what it looks like. Everybody else had been there 20 years, right? So it's a lot of it's luck and just looking for opportunities as well. Like sometimes things will fall into your lap like that did for me, but also, you know, you have to look out for those and volunteer and just be like, hey, if nobody else wants to do it, I'll do it. You know, it's a risk to your career, but I can't say it's always worked out well, but I always learned something from it.
And that sort of brings up to the next point. You've gone down the route of progressing into leadership positions, senior executive positions now for pretty major companies. Now, it's no secret that that's dominated by a certain demographic, pretty much, especially in tech. I think that's always been a male-dominated industry. So going through the motions from, you know, your app dev days to now deputy CISO, what hurdles have you faced, I suppose, throughout every single phase of the journey? And I suppose, how have you overcome them as well?
Sure. So I think there's been different things that I've run into at different points to your question, right? So when I was a new manager, I remember getting a performance review, which was a good performance review, but some of the comments were just about my approach and how I would come off as a little bit dominant, right? And that could be taken as condescending. And I kind of looked at that and I had to think about to myself, and it was weird because it was from a female leader, right? So we're not always our best advocates, right? Because there wasn't any constructive feedback with it. It was just, hey, this is sometimes the perception, you know, and this was back in the late 90s. And, you know, I finally came to the conclusion that if a gentleman had been in the same situation, they would not have gotten that feedback. But it was because I was a female in a leadership position and I was exerting dominance over the situation, not in an unhealthy way, but I was directing the conversations, moving us along, and I'm a little direct. I admit that. It's my personality. So, you know, it was coming off differently as a woman than it would have as a man. And I was like, you know what? I'm okay with that. And because the people that were on my team and things like that, they knew me, they knew my intentions and such. So those were the ones that I cared about. And I was like, if somebody else is just, you know, not really taking it well, I can't control how they respond. I can only control how I respond. So I did, you know, some self-reflection and made some adjustments because there's always room for improvement. So I don't want to say it was completely that, but, you know, I did reflect on that and made some improvements. And then also just kind of realized this is what I'm going to have to deal with. And I'm just going to have to accept it and move on and continue to grow my career. And I think in a later situation, much more recently, I had a situation where I was talking to somebody about a role that I was potentially interested in. And the response from a very senior leader was, oh, no, you don't want that. You should go do this. We really need help over here. And I was just kind of like, did you just tell me what I don't want?
Yeah.
You know, obviously I was in my head and, you know, because this is a pretty senior leader, I'm not going to burn my bridge. But at the same time, I was like, wow, that's the first time this has happened to me. And, you know, it's small things that can happen throughout your career. And I think to some respect, they happen to everybody. at some point or another. It just comes out a little bit more in the diversity areas. But, you know, I was in a leadership conversation the other day with a panel of women. We were at a conference and we were discussing similar topics. And it was funny because all of us had kind of the same opinion, and we had all gotten to places within our career. And it was really of the fact of just ignore it to some extent. Like, it's, you know, you run into situations where somebody's going to push back because of your gender or diversity and be like, I'm not wasting my time with you. Right. And I'm just going to go on with my career. And, you know, I mean, sometimes you have to do that by getting out, but just depending on the severity. But at the same time, it was like, I'm not going to waste my time with this. I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to move on with my career. And, you know, essentially just not let it get to you and move forward, you know, because you're always going to have, everybody's going to have these little things.
Yeah, and that sort of brings to the next question I was going to ask. And, you know, you talk about these micro, I suppose, aggressions that people talk about. And when it comes to, let's say, younger people coming in the industry, particularly females, they might hear these things and it might affect them in terms of wanting to progress, wanting to speak up and show their opinion. What do you think that companies, senior leaders, managers, whatever level, can do to promote that, I suppose, not aggression, that's the wrong word, but promote that eagerness to learn and be a part of a team that maybe isn't being shown now?
You know, I think it's giving them opportunities to move into special projects and things like that, to get exposure as a leader, right? And encourage people in a room to speak up. So when you're in a room with your team and everything, make sure everyone feels safe enough to discuss, right? That's psychological safety. It's very important to me to make sure that everyone that reports within my organization, not just directly, but as a whole, feels comfortable enough with me that they can say anything professionally, right? Obviously, but you know, you just have to remain professional and create that safe space for people. That's the biggest thing, and making sure that you demonstrate it, right? When somebody does speak up, that you show compassion for what they're saying and not shoot it down. Because to me, it's all about the actions, right? So just because you say it, people don't buy it, right? Especially with these touchy subjects, right? It's, you have to actually demonstrate what you've said. And then once you do that, they will start to buy in. But it's not going to take overnight. You know, cultures take several years to fully cement and can get blown up in a matter of months. So you have to be very careful. But it's really just establishing that culture and making sure that people feel psychologically safe to have those opinions.
And there's a stat out there that I actually read it on LinkedIn the other day, that there's essentially, when a job application, you see a job application online, and there's I think you know where I'm going.
I know exactly where you're going.
You see the specifications, right? 80% of males will apply for a role they're not, I suppose, suited to, but females maybe not. What advice would you give to people applying for a role that maybe they're not necessarily ready for, but they can step in and grow to?
Yeah, I think I've had this conversation recently with a couple of people. I think it's women want 100% of the required, and even some of the preferred. You know, they'll look at it holistically, where men is like 60% or something, and they'll go ahead and apply. And I just keep beating into every women that I talk to that are trying to move up in their careers. I'm like, ignore it. Do you think you can do that job? Yes or no? The worst thing that will happen is they won't call you back. That's the worst thing that could happen. And you know what? They're not calling you back now. Right? So, you know, there's no downside to applying, because even if you know, they come back and they're like, okay, yeah, you know, you don't have all this, but something about your resume may spark their interest, and maybe they have something else that you're not aware of. So literally the worst thing that can happen is they say no. So I tell women, like, don't pay attention to the preferred stuff. Like use it as input into, your responses and all that kind of stuff. But when deciding whether or not to apply for something, look at the job description, look at the company. Is it of interest? And hit submit. Like there's literally no downside.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. I think that needs to be promoted more. And when we look at the future, future technology, future security, whatever it may be, I suppose with more and more females coming into the industry, what advice would you specifically give them?
Take chances, right? Like I think that the biggest steps that I've made in my career were chances I took that I wasn't 100% comfortable with. I moved my entire family from Massachusetts to North Carolina when my kids were 2 and 6, right? My husband had to get a new job when we moved down, and we left family. We knew no one in North Carolina, and I think moving around is a little more mainstream now, but back 15 plus years ago it was, but it's just an example of, get out of your comfort zone strategically, right? I'm not saying be reckless, but, make those strategic risk decisions that are going to make your career, and don't box yourself into a certain path, right? My path was not a straight line, right? It's kind of all over the place. And you have to kind of look at opportunities that present themselves and kind of go, okay, what am I going to learn from that? And where could it potentially take me? Because like I said, it's not going to be a straight line. And you have to be flexible in where you want to go, because at the end, I have said, when I was 22, I wanted to get into security leadership. Security didn't exist when I was 22, right? I remember I was in a breach back, what we would define as a breach now, back in like 2005. And we didn't call it a breach because that wasn't a common term, and so there's things that are going to come up in the future that you have no idea even exist yet. So don't fixate on a specific career path. Have one in mind, but be open to other types of opportunities that could lead you to places that you never even imagined.
You gave me some advice there, actually. Don't go into a box. I appreciate that. Hey, thank you for that. Obviously, just given your reputation, given what you've done, I'm sure many people will probably want to reach out to you. How can they reach out to you and ask you any questions?
Sure. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. And so, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody has. Just reach out on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, thank you for your time today, and it's been great to speak to you again.
Me too. Thanks so much. It's been great.
Thanks for listening to Leadership Lessons in Cyber. I look forward to seeing you all on the next episode.